Philly Startup Leaders presents the 2013 Founder Factory Conference. This program was recorded November 21st, 2013 at the World Cafe Live in Philadelphia. Founder Factory thanks these sponsors for their continued financial support. In this program, Crossing the Chasm, Finding Your Scaling Trajectory, with Michael Krupit, founder and managing partner of Trajectify.
Mike Kanban. As always, things are running a little behind. I'll be very quick. I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Mike Krupit. Mike is a 7-time veteran of startups, and that was actually a very great segue coming from one to another. This one's working, right? You can hear me? So, Mike has been around the scene, and I've gotten to know him through a handful of conversations just at various events. He's got a lot of great knowledge, and so two logistical things. One, we do have a hashtag. I know people are asking about that. It is PSLFF13. So if you're tweeting, please share knowledge, nuggets, insight, thoughts, questions. And then the other thing, after Mike's speech, we'll have a little bit of a breakout session workshop, which is related, so make sure you take notes. All right? So without further ado, Mike Krupit. That'll help.
I can't see you if this is up here. All right. Well, I can't see my presentation in front of me, so you're going to have to forgive me every now and then. I'm going to have to look back to make sure we are where we are. And the other thing you have to forgive me is I have to wear glasses because there's a couple things I'm going to read. Being a startup veteran just means that the memory and the eyesight goes. Just testing the technology. Okay, great. Thanks. So as we all know, today's theme is scaling your startup. I'm going to talk in a couple slides about what that is. But first and foremost, what I want to do is give you a little bit of sense of my background for those that don't know me well, so you can understand where some of my perspectives are coming from. Just as a note, I'm not the guy who starts these companies, right? My role has been the one who finds the founder with all this passion and vision, and then I help him operationalize that. I help him turn his idea into a real company. So I don't necessarily call myself an entrepreneur, but I call myself extraordinarily entrepreneurial. Now, because I've got 30 years of startups, I'm going to have to read some of these notes because, like I said, the memory goes first. Knowledge Set was my first startup in Silicon Valley. We were one of the initial companies to put data onto a CD-ROM. We were a 15-person company backed by a corporate ventures group. We never grew. We had no management. Our CEO only worked 2 half-days a week, and he came in right with his golf wear right from the course. They hired a new VP of engineering a couple of years into my tenure there who I didn't get along with, so I left. The only really exciting thing that happened to me there was we got to do a project with Stephen Jobs when he was building out his company called Next. I then went to Verity, which was a very typical early Silicon Valley type company. We were VC funded, we were a full text search engine. Very quickly we grew to a couple hundred people and had offices all around the world. The challenge were that the sales didn't keep up with the scale of the company. So they brought in a new CEO to turn the company around. He and I didn't get along, so I left. He did eventually take the company public. They lost momentum though and sold it to Autonomy, who eventually sold to Hewlett-Packard. I came to Pennsylvania and then I joined Infonautics in its early stages. I'm going to talk politely about it just in case Josh Kopelman is listening here. We were an online search engine for kids. We took it public because back in those days it was very easy to take a company public. Grew to a couple hundred employees. Again, the sales didn't keep up with the scale of the company. They brought in a new CEO and he and I didn't get along that well, so I left. And eventually they split the company into a couple parts, sold off those parts, and maybe we can proudly say that today that the intellectual property we developed in that company is still being used by patent trolls to beat up all the big guys. I went to CD Now, which was many of you know, is the pioneer in online music retail. This is when the internet was first getting started. We couldn't keep up with the demand. We were doubling every 6 months. We took the company public. We did a secondary public offering. We spent a lot of money building brands, acquiring customers. We merged with our closest competitor, who was another local company called N2K Music Boulevard. That grew our company to nearly 750 people. Challenge is it was a commodity product, right? Doesn't matter where you buy your music from, so we were losing money on every sale. The internet bubble burst in 2000. There's no more capital available for us to keep the company going, so we sold it to Bertelsmann. Now, Bertelsmann put in a new CEO. Unfortunately, this time I couldn't leave because it was me. And they, a year later, they decided that they didn't want to be in that business anymore, and they shut us down. From there, our good friend Steve Goodman introduced me to Knight, which was a spin-out from Princeton University. It was angel-funded, new automotive technology. The previous two CEOs, the company was 6 years old, the previous two CEOs came from the automotive industry, but they couldn't get any traction, so they thought, let's bring in an entrepreneur. I raised more money. I took the product to Detroit in Germany. We did a very impressive demo, but the challenge was the product hadn't yet been commercialized. I encouraged the board to put the business back into R&D, but send it back to Princeton University and stop spending any of the company's focus and resources on building a business out of it. And 10 years later to this day, they're still actually in the lab building it. I then took a one-year stint as starting up a system to swap books, music, movies, and video games called Nexploration. We raised enough money to build it, but not enough to market it, and because it's a community site, you need critical mass to be successful, and this was back in the days where there wasn't any money and it was very difficult to get traction, still from a technology perspective. So I decided to leave startups, and I did a small company turnaround, went to Voice Systems Engineering, which was a 20-year-old telecommunications company. As the Chief Innovation Officer, my initial focus was on technology and business development. What happens is we ended up scaling the company very well. We doubled the revenues, we dramatically increased the profits, and my focus was to return the company to its roots of being entrepreneurs. The culture, the teams, and the process had all forgot what it was like to be entrepreneurs 20 years later, and that's what we did. So out of Voice Systems Engineering, I spun a startup incubator called Novatorium. Novatorium was the idea of let's pick up all the startups after they come out of the accelerators, the ones that aren't ready yet, that need traction but aren't yet ready yet to raise money. I left that after a year to join Real Foodworks to work with Lucinda Duncalf based upon our shared passions for improving access to healthy foods. So I spent the first year there getting the company started. We grew very quickly to 11 people. And you know, as experienced entrepreneurs, we realized that we were scaling too fast. We had no traction. We weren't ready to scale. We were too big of a team, so I stepped aside to do something else, but continued to be an advisor and shareholder of the company. And currently, I'm co-founding my eighth startup called Intronet, which we'll talk about at some other point. The thing, though, when I left Real Foodworks, what I did was I spent a few months, I guess you can call it bumming around, talking to investors and entrepreneurs and service providers, basically people who could help me identify holes and challenges and problems in the ecosystem. And I saw a few common themes that I eventually focused on. One was that startups, as they grow, were getting to the point where they were stuck. They were stuck in front of what I called the chasm at the time. You grow to some point, let's say $500,000, $1 million, and then all of a sudden you're standing at the edge realizing that this next leap is much bigger than all the steps that you've previously taken. So there was a lot of entrepreneurs, whether they didn't have the experience or enough team or enough resource or enough time to figure out how to get across that chasm. The coaches, the mentors, the advisors who I was seeing, this is the second part of the problem, they either had great breadth, right? So they were a management consultant who had seen a lot of different opportunities, but never really had been in the trenches, or they had great depth where they had very specific sharpshooter skills in finance or marketing or fundraising or technology. But there was really very few people who could bring all of that together and embed themselves within these companies that are stuck to help them get unstuck. So that's when I formed Trajectify, which is a coaching practice that I'm now in the process of building. Now, as a coach, I spend 80% of my time listening. And people think that coaches talk. It's like, no, 80% of my time is listening. So it's kind of a little bit awkward to come up here and realize that I'm the only one on stage and now I've got to talk for 40 minutes. So I'm not going to talk for 40 minutes. I've got some slides in here that are going to try to structure this into more of an interactive discussion. The fact is that I'm here as the opening act for Will Reynolds, so my job is to warm the audience up. So if I suck, it's because you're not participating, so I'm going to make you participate today. I've done some storytelling here, and I really enjoy storytelling. I know people like hearing it, but I really want to talk less about what I've seen in the past and more about the lessons that I've learned. I want you to think not about how I've done it, but I want all the lessons learned, I want it to be going through your minds this morning, how you're going to apply each and every one of them to your business. So maybe you can give me a show of hands just so I can know who's in the audience here. This is the first audience participation, so show of hands is required. Startup with traction. So if you're a startup with traction that's about ready to scale, could you raise your hand? Great. What about startups that are still in the traction phase, that haven't quite achieved it yet? Okay. A very early stage startup, so you're not even thinking about traction, you're just getting your MVP launched. What about someone who's not at a startup yet but seriously considering one? Okay. What about, are there any startups in here that have already scaled? Okay. And finally, service providers? Excellent. All right, that helps me. You did a very good job. It was nice raising your hands. We're going to do another hand raising exercise a little bit later. So this was the opening scene in my presentation because I don't know, I personally find it really peaceful. At the end of a long grind at the office, wouldn't it be nice to just walk into the sunset, facing the horizon with that setting sun warming my face, until you realize that at some point it's like, oh wait, I can't walk into the sunset just yet. I actually got to go over there to the other side. So all of a sudden, the pretty scene becomes a little bit daunting, right? So I've really subtitled my theme today, Crossing the Chasm, right? If you're going to scale your company, you're going to have to figure out how to cross that chasm. Now, I'm repurposing a phrase coined by Jeffrey Moore. So he has this book and this philosophy around the technology product adoption life cycle. It's good stuff to know, but it's not what we're talking about today. I'm stealing the chasm concept, but we're not talking about Jeffrey Moore's chasm. So we've got this chasm, and this looks like a pretty small chasm. They're deep, right? So you don't really want to fall into it, but it's pretty small. But sometimes, when you're standing at the edge, it's really hard to get the perspective as to how big the chasm is. And so a lot of people look at it more as a canyon, and I could have called it Crossing the Canyon, but it's not as catchy. If you're standing in front of the Grand Canyon, there are several ways to get across the Grand Canyon. These are actual past attempts of people to cross the Grand Canyon. That one was really interesting. I don't presume that you guys should do it that way. We're going to do it. We're going to walk through a couple of steps as to how to cross the chasm. The two important parts are momentum and trajectory, right? You got to know where you're going to cross. You got to know what direction you're headed. You've got to have enough traction, velocity, and lift to get completely across. And then you've got to scale, and that's the trajectory piece. I'll touch on the traction, but today we're going to really talk about scale, which is trajectory. Traction's important, right? You need momentum. Without momentum, you're not going to get across the chasm. So what is momentum? For startups, it's called traction, right? And we hear a lot of talk about that in the startup world, right? It's critical for success. You need it as early as possible. It's a key element to a lot of the early hypotheses that you're testing. So what traction is, it's a repeatable formula for acquiring customers and the ability to do so where you generate more profit from those customers than the cost to acquire them. So let me say that again, right? It's a repeatable, that's the key word, repeatable formula for acquiring customers, and you're profiting from those customers more than it's costing to acquire them. Right? You need traction in order to cross the chasm. You need to get your traction before you scale. If you're a tech startup, there's lots of levels of getting traction, right? First, you're going to focus on building traffic, right? Then you're going to go look for partnerships to perhaps help you get traffic. You're going to need to engage those users. You're going to need to get those users registered with your system. You're going to need to turn those into active users. You're going to need to generate some revenue from them. And you're going to need to then turn those revenues into, make those revenues profitable. So there's a lot of different steps in building traction. Now, the PSL community talks about traction a lot. You know, and again, I'm said that we're not going to cover it here. Search the web. Gabriel Weinberg has a great blog on it, and he's coming out with a book on it soon. Go to his website and sign up to be notified when the book's available. Getting traction is what you're going to spend the first few years of your startup doing before you're ready to start scaling. So I need you to another hand raising, but everybody raise your hands together, your right hand, and you need to repeat after me. I don't get paid if I don't warm you up for Will, so everybody raise your right hand. All right, repeat after me. I will not scale. I will not scale. That was good. Before I have traction. Before I have traction. Thank you. All right. You got that on video, right? All right. All right, so now let's talk about scale, right? Let's talk about trajectory. So scale is achieved, right, when you know what your trajectory is. And let's talk about what trajectory is. But it's a shift from your day-to-day survival to a long-term looking forward, right? We're going to look at 4 elements of trajectory: vision, goals, plans, and the ability to measure. So each of these steps provides a foundation for the next, right? So we've got vision, we've got goals, strategy and tactics are really planning, and then it dictates your activities from day to day. So it's great that the last panel started talking about mission, because that's really where we're gonna start. We're gonna start with vision, right? Vision is the North Star of your company, all right? It defines what your optimal state is, and it describes all the potential that you have, right? It's the first step in being clear about where you're heading. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be not particularly achievable, right? Not achievable. It never changes. Everyone in the company is always checking to make sure that they're in alignment with it. It should energize and excite your team, and it should guide both your big plans and every day-to-day decision. Without a vision, it's really easy to drift aimlessly. Even as a dynamic startup, you need direction. Remember, we're ready to scale, so we're not thinking pivot anymore. You need a long-term firm direction. Often, and I'll mention this in passing, I didn't put slides in here on values because I'm going to run short on time, but often when the last panel talked about having a core value statements, and you should do that in parallel with having a vision. So here's a bunch of famous company visions. We're going to have a little exercise right now. You're going to tell me whose vision you think that is. I'll read them one at a time. Our vision is to be the Earth's most customer-centric company, to build a place where people can come and find and discover anything they might want to buy online. Amazon, right. This is a giveaway. A personal computer in every home running Microsoft software, all right. Sorry. Create experiences that combine the magic of software with the power of internet services across a world of devices. I see it was a trick question. Microsoft, after 30 years, realized that it's not about the personal computer. That's Microsoft's new vision. To be the pulse of the planet. Oh, come on, shout out a guess. Twitter. To make people happy. Disney. To refresh the world. Coca-Cola, right? That's a famous one that people hold up as an example. They actually have a couple of different visions that they usually combine, but that's the key one. So one more, the one here at the bottom. We connect people to music. Oh, you guys read me like a book. CD Now. So, you know, we did posters, we did mugs, we did everyday reminders. There was a lot of focus on keeping our people and our plans all headed in the same direction. It was that point on the horizon, right, where we know that everything we were doing was connecting to connect people to music. Now, in preparation for today's talk, I said, all right, I'm going to take a picture of the mug. And then I realized I had 2 mugs, and then I realized we had 2 visions. But the thing I said about visions never changing, well, apparently sometimes they do, but you can't blame me in this case because I wasn't running the company at the time. So let me ask the audience right now, has anybody developed a vision for their company? All right, I see a couple of hands. You want to shout it out?
Yes, we have relationships.
We document relationships that exist within families. Others? We empower people through technology. Sounds pretty far-reaching. Others?
To be the pioneer for talent development program, pioneer specialized in training digital analysts.
Okay, I'm not going to be able to repeat that.
No, I just finished it last week.
You just finished it last week. So now, so you need to memorize it. You need to memorize it really well. Maybe you need to make a poster and hang it on the wall where you work. But that's great. So one of the exercises we're going to do later this morning is do a little vision statement work. Okay. So the next step in vision forms the foundation for goals. So goals is the next step. Right? Unlike a vision, having goals is an ongoing process. It gives us a direction to move forward. Vision gives us direction to move forward. Goals tell us specifically where to go. So if you're ready to scale, you should start with long-term goals. Start with 3-year goals, then you work your way back to 2-year goals, 1-year goals, 6-month goals, quarterly goals, and monthly goals if you're so inclined. You create your goals from the top down. You create corporate goals. Then your departments might have goals, and then your employees have goals, and you start at the top down so that everyone can ensure that what they're working on is directly correlates to a top-level goal in the company. So what you're doing is you're building a path. It's really important to know when you're on the path and when you might stray or fall off the path. Right? We're not fortune tellers, so goals are revisited very regularly. Things happen, we overestimate, we underestimate, opportunities come up that shift our resources. Now, there are some bloggers and startup advisors who say that startups should never have a goal, right? Because first, it does require predicting the future, and they also think it inspires short-term thinking. I am in complete opposition to those statements. The fact is that we're starting with goals from day one of our company, right? Hang on. Did I miss a slide? Can I go back? Okay, so that's what I was just talking about. So day one of the company, we're testing hypotheses, right? If you're following a lean startup methodology, the fact is that that is a goal, right? You have a goal to find a hypothesis and go test it, right? So the concept of goals exists from day one of your company. There are different types of goals, and we're not going to go into all of them. These are a few common ways of looking at goals. Jim Collins has coined a term called BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. You've probably heard about it. All your goals should be SMART goals. Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Measurable being the key word, and we're going to talk about that later. And Google has a system that they call OKR, objectives and key results. The objectives, like BHAGs, are ambitious and uncomfortable. The key results, like SMART goals, need to be measurable. What are the kinds of goals that you might have as a startup that's getting ready to scale? It could be goals around raising capital, growing revenues or profits, expanding your operations, making yourself more efficient or effective, changing your products, enhancing your products, adding new products, spending money, investing, doing M&A perhaps, exiting the company. If you might have a goal to go public, or you might have a goal to sell your company. If you're going to sell your company, who are you going to sell it to, and what kind of company do they want to build? A lot of people just think that selling your company is something that, an exit is not a goal, it's just something that happens. That's not true, right? You figure out who's going to acquire you, exactly what they want to build, and that's what you should be building a path towards building. These were at CD Now. We did a kickoff in 2001, I believe. We took all of the company goals. We were a large company at the time, and we put them into buckets, these five high-level buckets, and then each of those buckets we broke down into major corporate goals. So in this case, what are the goals? I can't read it from here. Grow the revenues, acquire customers, acquire non-product revenues, and deliver synergies from our sister companies, and they were all measurable, right? There's metrics associated with each one of those. And then what happens is you take those goals to the rest of the organization, different departments, figure out what goals that they're going to have to achieve in order for the company to meet its goals. They figure out ways to measure them, and then ultimately, this is part of a strategic planning process, they figure out what are the initiatives I need to take in order to meet those goals. So if I can get a little bit of a show of hands, how many people already have goals for their company? All right. Is anyone willing to share one of their short-term goals? A 3-month goal, a 6-month goal?
And the year next year, be able to have it be my full-time job.
Okay. All right. At the end of next year, have it be my full-time job. Somewhat measurable, right? That's of a binary measurement. It will or it won't. Then the question is, can you line up the tactics that will get you to that goal? Any other goals? Okay, so that's certainly a time-driven goal, right? Get the App Store in this week, and you know what you need to do to get it done. Okay. All right. Any more mid to long-term goals that you guys might have? Increase leads by 50% by the end of next year. Excellent goal. Specific, measurable, time-driven. Other goals? Retain 10 clients for 6 months. Excellent goal. I believe maybe in the exercises for the workshop, we're going to have you guys work on goals as well. I can't remember if I included that or not. So goals are important, right? Right, so accountability and focus, right? You need to have the path defined as I've described, right? You need to know who's supposed to be doing what. What goals do is it organizes the chaos. Early days in a company, it might feel chaotic. Goals help you really put those, take control over those. Important thing to note is goals give you the ability to say no. That's something that startups have a lot of trouble doing, right? If you know what you're trying to accomplish, anything that's not getting you to accomplish that is no. Right, so you end up with no more spaghetti on the wall. You really shift your focus from being a day trader to being a long-term investor. So let's see. So the next step then is with a vision, we've built our goals. Now our goals have to define a strategy, right? And I'm going to call it less of a strategy and more about a strategic plan, because to me a strategy is a way of thinking, and a plan is actually something that you can produce. So what is strategic thinking, right? It's finding a solution that gets you from where you are now to where you want to be, right? Where you are now to where you want to be. Now goals define where you want to be, right? So the strategy gives you definition and scope for all of the initiatives and tasks that you're going to accomplish to meet those goals, right? It's a thought process though that takes you to where you want to be. The big question though is, how do you figure out where you are now? There's a whole bunch of different types of tools you can do, right? You can just sit there with a blank sheet of paper and figure out where you are now, but there are a lot of tools that you can tap into that will help you assess where your business is. We're not going to go through all of these tools. The one that is pretty common that you see a lot of young companies doing, as well as more mature companies, is the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Your strengths and opportunities are the positive aspects of your business. The weaknesses and threats, the negative aspects of it. Strengths and weaknesses are internal, based on internal factors. Opportunities or threats are based on external factors. You assess your business, filling in all of these quadrants, and then what you do is you focus on how to leverage your strengths, how to compensate for or eliminate your weaknesses, maybe even turning them into strengths, how to take advantage of all the opportunities, and then how to mitigate the risks that exist because of the threats, or actually how to turn some of those threats into opportunities themselves. Once you know where you are and where you want to be, now you've got to put a plan together. There are lots of, and we don't have enough time today to really go through that. There are lots of ways to put together a plan. It's going to be based upon the size of your company, the experience your team has, the kind of culture that you're building. So there are tools, and like I said, no tool is good for everyone. I'll tell you that my favorite one is what we call weighted prioritization. So let me give you a sense for what a tool might help you do. So weighted prioritization, let's go back to those CD Now buckets of high-level buckets of goals. We'll call each of those a criteria, right? So we figure out what are the criteria for our successfully meeting our goals. Revenue growth might be one of them. Operational efficiency might be another one, right? And then we assign a relative weight, right? Some goals we know have more impact on our business than other goals. So we assign a weight to each of those criteria. We then list in perhaps a brainstorming exercise and perhaps contributions from all your different your team members or your departments. We list all the projects that we think that we would need to accomplish or that we might want to accomplish in order to help us achieve those goals. You then go through each of those tasks and you rate them against each of those criteria, right? So you end up with each row having a series of numbers that represents how strongly each of those tasks contributes to those criteria. So a task might be particularly strong, let's call it on a scale of 1 to 5, might be a 5 in terms of growing revenue, but only a 2 in terms of operational efficiency, right? And then you take those weights, you multiply the ratings by those weights, you sum it up for each of those tasks, and you put them in priority order. Weighted prioritizations, you're weighting it by the criteria that you're judging your success on, and then the important projects bubble to the top, the non-important projects fall to the bottom. You look at all the effort that's required for each of those projects, and then you draw a line where you run at a resource, right? Where you have no more time, people, money to execute, and then everything below the line doesn't get done. How many people here have done a SWOT analysis on their company? All right, only a couple hands there. I think that might be part of the exercise. You'll have a chance to work on one this morning. For anyone who's done a SWOT analysis, are you comfortable to share, one each of your strengths and your weaknesses or your opportunities and threats?
I would say that my biggest strength is my marketing background.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of knew what I needed to be doing in that area, but one of the big weaknesses was I didn't have any money. I had maybe like a couple $100 to my name when I first started, so I was really at a disadvantage that way.
It's a very common strength and weakness pair, right? Especially at startups, right? We're strong because we have experience in the specialty that we're building our company on, right? It's sort of supposed to work that way. But our weakness might be we don't have enough cash or people to actually accomplish all of our goals. Any other SWOT items out there that people are willing to share? All right. All right, so tactics, right? We now, the strategy dictates the tactics that we need to take. Right, so the tactics are the efforts and initiatives that we're going to accomplish to meet our goals. This ups the ante on your organizational skills, right? Here's where you've got to build a well-oiled machine, right? You got to get good at project management. Maybe you even need to consider hiring a project manager, right? Or in the case of CD Now, we had a whole department of them. Use a combination of online and offline tools to manage and track what's going on, right? These could be as simple as a popular tool like Trello, or it could be something as big and complicated as a Microsoft project. Kanban is a popular tool for startups. It's an offline tool. I mean, you could do it in Trello online, but it's very popular with startups, those doing agile development who have all these regular stand-up meetings, right? A Kanban creates a physical presence in your space that people can stand around. The important message, though, as you're finding all the tools, you gotta measure everything. So here's a Kanban board. This is probably from a startup, right? Kanban was developed by Toyota as part of their lean startup methodology for manufacturing predominantly. So you can see here, it's an agile development process. So it's the backlog, all the things that we haven't gotten to yet, what we're doing, what needs to get done. As you move things from doing to done, you potentially can then take things from your backlog and move it into your doing. You do it with Post-it notes. You color code them so that each different color is a different category of task or initiative. So this is a really easy and simple and fast way of doing short-term goals, tracking the projects for short-term goals. The risk is stay focused. Stay focused. The Kanban board is really good at keeping you focused. Interesting story, where you place your Kanban board is very important. At Real Food Works, we've had our Kanban board, what turned out to be under a heat duct, and when the summer became the winter and the heat kicked on, we'd come in the morning and the heat would take all of our Post-it notes and we'd find them in a pile on the floor. So of course I put everything in when I picked them up in the morning, I put it all in the done column. So measuring, right? So now we're working on these initiatives. They're heading towards goals. We've got to be able to measure. So how do we measure? We track metrics, right? Metrics are the key word, right? You have to have key metrics that you track daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually. All of the above, right? You should be looking at numbers every day. You can use a dashboard to track and share the metrics. I'm going to show you a few in a second. You also should have a budget, right? So that the actual results can be compared against where you thought you were going to be, right? This is the path that we talked about. How do you know if you're on your if you're staying on the path if you're not measuring? And don't just budget money, budget all the metrics, right? You want to forecast every metric and you want to track every metric, not just cash. So here from those presentations at the 2001 kickoff at CD Now, this was our budget for some of the key company metrics. So we picked a specific number that we were going to achieve by the end of the year, and then eventually we built a plan that allowed us to track them department by department, action item by action item, metric by metric, all the way through to the end of the year. We also tracked then the cash as well, looking every month at what we were budgeting, what we were actuals were, and what we might forecast based upon what we had been learning, right? Is our path potentially going to change? Morgan Lewis was one of our attorneys at CD Now, and I think he might be a little bit uncomfortable that I'm sharing some corporate data, but notice that none of it is labeled. They're 10 years gone, so we're safe, right? Okay, execution, right? So if you've taken all the previous steps, execution is going to be easy, right? The vision, the goals, the plan, the ability to measure. So there really is no lecture on execution. Execution is something that you just get good at as you follow all the steps that we've prescribed, right? You got to make sure that you're ready. You got to know that you have traction, right? Remember what we said before, right? You got to have traction, right? Make sure that you've examined all your risks, right? This is preparedness. Have I looked at all my risks? Do I have any hypotheses that I haven't tested yet, right? Don't start on all of this until you're ready. Be sure that you're listening to your customers. The fact is that customers, we start day one, right? Lean Startup teaches us to go out there and get out of the building, listen to your customers, but it doesn't stop. It starts day one and it never stops. As big as you get, you always need to be listening to your customers. Finally, manage your time, right? There are going to be a ton of distractions coming from all directions. Look at these as any sort of drag or resistance or friction in your trajectory. You need to control your distraction, right? So there's a time management tool that I started using 20 years ago when Stephen Covey created it, and it works really well for me, and it's one of the tools, again, I'll use as an example to share. So we're looking at urgent and not urgent. We're looking at important and not important. So there's 4 quadrants here, right? Urgent and important is the first quadrant here. It's the crisis. It's crisis. It's necessity. It's the things that you have to do. It's deadlines. It's things on fire, right? Quadrant 3 then at the bottom is urgent and not important, right? It's our distraction. It's our phone calls. It's some of our social media. It's some of our emails. It's the things that pull us away from doing the important stuff. The quadrant 4, the quadrant of waste, right? Not important and not urgent, right? So at that point, it's busy work, it's trivia, it's mindless escapes. And then the zone, the place where you want to be, is quadrant 2. And so a lot of people will hear me asking them, are you in quadrant 2, right? So quadrant 2 is the zone. It's where you do your prevention, your planning, your building, right? It's a very long-term focus. The idea is to stay in quadrant 2 as much as you can. If you're focused on quadrant 2, things won't easily become on fire and shift to quadrant 1. So the goal is move yourself out of 1, get into 2, control number 3. We can't eliminate it, right? We live in a day and age where collisions are important, and so you want to allow some time for collisions. We live in a very connected world, but you got to control it, and then you want to minimize or eliminate number 4, the time waste. Perhaps contain it to just those mindless escapes that are necessary to recharge us in order to accomplish everything in the other quadrants. So the rule of thumb for me is spend 65% of my time in quadrant 2, spend 15% of my time dealing with all of the distractions in quadrant 3. That leaves 15% for fighting fires and doing all the crisis management and all my deadline-driven work, and 5% of my time to sort of stay sane and be mindless. I believe in the workbooks there might be an exercise to do that as well, for you to sit there, take one of your typical days or one of your typical weeks, plug them into the quadrants and see how you're spending your time, if you're actually managing your time effectively. So now you're going to tell me that a lot of this sounds like big company stuff, and the fact is that it is, and isn't that what by definition scale is? You're trying to get big. So, you know, you want to behave like a big company because you are becoming a big company. So I'm going to read something. Just this morning, somebody tweeted an interview with, a link to an interview with Eric Ries that happened just yesterday. It got published yesterday. And it was interesting to hear, you know, Eric Ries, who everyone holds up as, you know, the god of lean startup. But you know, we think about lean startup as the first couple of years of the company, where there's not a lot of management and structure, or not the appearance of a lot of management and structure. And he doesn't believe that at all. So let me read a quote from him. We make movies about brilliant entrepreneurial visionaries because that's what's interesting, but a startup is an organism and a human institution. It's not just the creation of a heroic individual, it is a system of individuals working together toward a common goal. And so entrepreneurship is management. It is fundamentally about organizing people to do something. And then the interviewer actually paraphrases it. It sounds like you need to apply rigorous management in a context that's naturally resistant to it. And the fact is that we are resistant to a lot of these things because we think it's what big companies do, and we don't know what value it brings to us. And it's often where I start my coaching with a lot of the companies I'm working for. And after you get through the process, you have that aha moment. Yes, I get it. So if you're a big company, there's big problems. Lots can go wrong. If you have a path and you're measuring progress, you're going to know before anything becomes a big problem, right? You're tracking it, you're going to see it right away. However, there is one big risk that I've half addressed and that I want to address a little bit more vocally here. The Startup Genome Project a few years ago looked at 3,200 startups to try to find patterns for success and failure. A lot of you might be familiar with it. Their most important discovery, really perhaps the only useful conclusion I think that came out of it, was that most startups don't die from external causes like competition. We're always worrying what the competitors are doing. Right? Startups die because of self-destruction. They kill themselves, and in 74% of the cases, they kill themselves by scaling too soon, right? Scaling before they have traction. This risk, the risk of scaling too soon, could be in any aspect of the company, right? You could ask for too high of a valuation and overvalue your company. You can hire too quickly, as we did in the case of potentially Infonautics and Verity. You can write too much code, right? So Lean Startup tries to get you to not do that. You can outsource too much product development. You could get traction built upon something outside of your company, and then once you need to scale, it's much tougher to scale. So the observation in the Startup Genome Project was that timing is everything, right? If you scale at the right time, you're going to grow 20 times more quickly than if you scale too soon. Everyone raise your right hand again. Again, say it, everybody, right? I will not scale before I have traction. You said it the first time with a lot more energy. I'm thinking because now you're a little nervous that you know what scale takes, or that you may not have enough traction. And hopefully, actually, some of you are thinking that right now. So, a few things I want to reiterate, some perspectives that I'd like to share based upon all the past points, right? If you're ready to scale, you're done pivoting, right? Get the P word out of your vocabulary, right? Once you have traction, you're done pivoting. Innovation is important, right? So this is the small company turnaround that I did. They forgot how to be entrepreneurial. They had no focus on innovation, right? So Stephen Johnson wrote a great book called Where Good Things Come From. It talks about the commonalities in innovation ecosystems, and it comes down to a couple of attributes that are important that you should be conscientious about building in your company. Fluidity, diversity, and collisions. And we could talk about that as the startup community as a whole, but even within your company, you want to encourage those traits because that's where innovation is going to come from. That's going to create a platform for innovation. Diverse, and that's, this is all something that we can label continuous improvement, which is again something that Eric Ries pulled from Toyota, and that's a key part of Lean Startup, right? that your operations, your team, your product, your company, all is going to need to continuously improve as you're on this trajectory. The one that's the most important that I preach a lot, and it's a mistake I've made in the past that I don't make anymore, diversity. I walk around now repeating this slogan time and nonstop. If there's 10 people in the room and they all agree, then 9 of them are unnecessary. The fact is, if I've got 10 people in the room, I want 10 different opinions. You want diverse perspectives in everything that it is that you do. Now's the time to do an advisory board. Even if you're a privately held company, get an advisory board, formalize it, right? It has the ability to have a dramatic impact on your company, and most of us underestimate and underutilize our advisors. Put together a formal board and use them. Maybe even you want to do the same thing with customers, right, and create a customer advisory panel, which is something that I've done in a few of the startups. Operational excellence is important, right? Related to continuous improvement, you need to make operational excellence part of your culture, right? Your idea or your product, your service is what got you to this point, but now it's all about execution that's going to make the company successful, right? So you need to think big, you need to get good at the execution, you need to focus on operational excellence. All right, so recap, that was a lot of stuff. I talked very fast, I apologize. And nobody's been holding a time, so I have no idea how I'm doing on time. I think I spoke for a half hour. Scale is achieved once you have traction. In order to scale, you need traction, right? You need that momentum. Once you have traction, scale is achieved with your trajectory. The key components of knowing your trajectory or having a vision, goals, plans, and the ability to measure. I guess we have time for questions, right? Anybody keeping time?
We can do questions, and then we're going to break down the board.
Okay, great. So let me give you guys a chance to ask questions. I'm sorry, the first, was it friendship? So I think maybe that's a question about culture, right? Friendship, you want to like the people you work with, right? It doesn't matter if you're working at Comcast or you're working at a 2-person startup, right? You got to like the people you're working with because you're spending 8, 10, or in the case of some startups, 16 hours a day with them. You better like them, right? So friendships develop out of that. But really what those do is you tap into those relationships to build a company culture. Culture is something that you should always keep in the back of your mind. I don't think you need to focus on it and define it specifically. It's hard to define a culture. It's hard to change a culture. I've spent a lot of time dealing with culture changes in big companies. At CD Now, it was very challenging because pre-IPO and post-IPO has to have impacts on the culture. Very small to very big. Going from an office in a SEPTA station to a 90,000 square foot building really changes the culture of the company. You come in one day and you realize, geez, I'm seeing people in the hallways and I don't know their names, I don't recognize them, I don't even know if they work for the company. So you need to think about culture, but you can't impact it, right? Culture is something that develops. The one thing I will say is just, friendships, right? You have relationships at work, keep your friendships outside of work. The fact is that one company I was working with had an employee that was a challenge and they wanted to let go. They struggled to let that person go because she was actually the roommates of one of the founders, so she was living with one of the founders. They let her go, right? The fact is you've got to draw a line between your personal life and your friendships and what's happening in the business if you're ever going to get to the point where you're ready to scale, right? You can't let that get in the way.
Point on culture, I think you can impact culture a lot. I think that you can hire in a certain way to attract a certain type of culture, and then you do things to reinforce it and keep it that way.
You can indirectly influence culture, I agree, by choosing who you hire. But I don't think, when we hire the right people, or sometimes we call that right chemistry, right? That person and I click or not, right? Maybe that's a softer way of saying culture. But yeah, you can influence culture. I don't think you can specifically set out to change it.
The biggest challenge we're facing now is that measure step and defining, what are like the 3 core metrics we've been focused on. Do you have any advice on what's the best methodology to, identify those top 3 metrics, number 1, and then actually how to measure them?
Well, I would say have the right goals, right? If you have the right goals, you'll know exactly what you need to measure, right? So without goals, measurements are not so important, right? You very easily can pick the wrong thing to measure and end up on a path that takes you nowhere to where you wanted to be. So have goals, you'll know exactly what to measure.
Do you have any suggestions on how to find your advisory board, and how should we compensate them? Should we pay them, or should we make them a part of the equity?
Sure. There are lots of ways to form an advisory board. I know a few consultants, that's all they do, is they help companies put together advisory boards. Tap into your network, tap into your investors if you have any, tap into your competitors, tap into your service providers. Again, diversity on an advisory board is as important as diversity inside your company. So you can build an advisory board off of people's connections on LinkedIn, right? But as you're interviewing advisors, you got to make sure they're committed. You got to put together a structure that formalizes the board. Regular meetings, regular updates. Compensation can be a number of different ways. Some advisors take cash. Most companies that are in our positions tend to offer equity anywhere from, depending upon how much commitment you're asking them for, anywhere from a 1/4% to 0.5%. That might vest over 4 years, right? But if you don't have equity in the company, or you're not comfortable giving equity, then cash certainly works. I used both cash and equity in different circumstances with some of our companies. But don't, you can consult with your advisors individually every now and then, but the power of your advisors is getting them together, bringing all those diverse opinions together, bringing those various experiences together, and magic happens when you do it, as opposed to doing all one-on-ones.
I have another question about metrics, particularly for early stage startups. Is there a danger that you're going to get so caught up in measuring key performance indicators, tracking your dashboards, that you that's all you do, and you end up in this rat race where the more you grow, the more you're tracking more and more metrics, and you're not actually getting anything done. You're just looking at your dashboard. I mean, I'm wondering if there's a danger there.
I'd imagine in some companies, especially young companies, there could be that danger. But if you're if you let that happen, then you probably shouldn't be an entrepreneur to begin with, right? I think it's a little bit self-selecting. Having goals tells you exactly what to measure, right? If you're not meeting your measurements, it doesn't mean that you're failing. Maybe that's an observation I should have made during the presentation, right? When you're not meeting the goals that you're measuring, it doesn't mean you're doing a bad job. It just means that you're off the path, right? And that means it's time to take a step back and evaluate the path, right? Are we working towards the right goals? Are all of the assumptions that we made and what it would take to meet those goals correct? And if not, you go and you fix it, right? You would change your path, you change your execution. So the measurements are in a way of saying, yay, we're doing a great job, although ultimately we use them to really support our successes. But it's really a matter of just tracking your progress so you know you're headed where you want to head.
I have one more question for scaling. I see sometimes people looking for business owner want to scale. I can spend my time to looking for more client or looking for more talent, help me to get the client, or I need the money, looking for finance to help me develop the business and hire more people. So among new client, new talent, more cash, those are all very important elements to scale. What's your advice for how can I focus one at a time to prioritize those competing needs to scale?
So that's a very good question. The fact is that when you're scaling, you need to scale everything, right? So if you're at the point where you're ready to scale, you're not a one-person show anymore, right? And we talked a little bit earlier this morning about leadership. We might talk later today about team building and hiring and managing, right? These are all important, right? Because you can't scale if you don't have the resources to do it, right? You got to have the capital, you got to have the people, right? You got to have the facilities, you got to have, whatever your business needs in order to grow has to be in place, right? Otherwise, you're not going to scale. As an entrepreneur, you worked hard to get your company traction, right? It still takes the same amount of effort to do it at scale. You just have to do it a lot bigger, right? So your team has to be bigger, your cash you have to have more cash. These are prerequisites for scaling. So you're no longer a one-person show, and if you still are a one-person show, you got to find a way to grow out of that before you scale, otherwise you scale too soon.
With respect to scaling, obviously it's a big problem and it led to a lot of failures, as you pointed out. So I guess, why, in your opinion, do so many companies scale too early? Is it just being over-optimistic? Is it misjudgment? What can really be done as an entrepreneur to make sure you're not scaling too early, and some of the telltale signs?
So the question is, why do we see companies scale too early? And I think that's a whole panel discussion with a lot of interesting perspectives. First and foremost, in some cities like New York and Silicon Valley, where companies start and end really quickly, and when the cash and the capital is flowing very rapidly, almost like noise. There's a culture of scaling too quickly, right? I want to be the next Instagram, so I've got 2 years. I've got to get as many customers as I can. Okay, at that point, you forget traction. You focus on scale, right? So there's a little bit of cultural in some areas. We don't see that in Philly a lot. There's an impatience. Right? So as entrepreneurs, we're just naturally impatient, right? So it's you just want to be bigger, right? It's like, all right, well, I think I have traction. I fool myself into believing I have traction. I'm probably not measuring my traction. And we didn't talk about measuring before scale. I talked about measuring afterwards, but certainly goals and measurements can happen before you scale. We fool ourselves into thinking we have traction and we're not ready yet to scale. So that's another reason that you might look in hindsight that you scale too early. All right, well, we've got a workshop to do. I don't know who's going to be facilitating that workshop, and I look forward to connecting with you guys over lunch. Thanks very much.
We hope you enjoyed this program from Philly Startup Leaders. For more information, visit phillystartupleaders.org. This program is a production of Professional Podcasts, a division of the Lubetkin Media Companies in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, on the web at lubetkin.net. If you'd like to purchase DVDs of Founder Factory programs, visit our online store, lubetkin.net/CubeCart. For everyone at Philly Startup Leaders, this is Steve Lubetkin. Thank you for joining us, and take good care.